Hello world, welcome to part 2 of what is going to be my solo deep dive into John Lennon's solo music. Hopefully it's been long awaited, at least by some of you. There's a big kind of elephant in the room as far as John Lennon goes, at least around about 1970-71. Right? Now in 1970, John Lennon wrote a song called Working Class Hero. It's on Plastic Ono Band. I didn't talk about the actual song Working Class Hero last time, but I did discuss the Plastic Ono Band LP in some depth in the last video, so watch that for opinions on that. But this song Working Class Hero, I think, got up reviewers' noses at the time, because how can a man with all that money declare himself to be working class? And looking at John Lennon's background even before he made all that money, as a kid growing up, he was hardly working class. His Aunt Mimi, her husband, had, you know, quite a well-paid job, and if you just look at the difference between the house that John Lennon grew up in Menlove Avenue, and the house in the Dingle where Ringo Starr grew up in, that is true working class. Even Paul's house was, you know, in a slightly less well-off area than John's, you know. So for him to say a working class hero is something to be, you know, he's stretching a point somewhat. He's stretching a point. And, you know, by the time that we come to this album, Imagine, and I've got the songbook here, so I'm going to just talk about the album from here. By the time you got to this LP here, you know, there was a chasm that big, so big that it goes off the video screen, between a working class hero and John Lennon's lifestyle. All right, we'll get into it with the song Imagine. Now, I did a cover version of this song 11 years ago on YouTube. It got 429 views. Well, it's had 429 views so far. So I'm going to put a link in the description to it. All right, it's just me playing it in my old flat, just live and no frills or anything like that. And yeah, I'd appreciate some views on that. But I'm going to read you the description that I wrote to that, because it's written by me, therefore it's not infringing any copyright and whatever. So, this is my take on the lyrics. Whether John and Yoko would agree is another matter. Some religious extremists had a field day with verse 1, denouncing Lennon as irreligious. He himself said in a 1980 interview that this was a misconception. Even the infamous 1966 Beatles' A Bigger Than Christ interview, Maureen Cleave ended that paragraph with, "He is reading extensively about religion." I'd be very surprised if one of those books wasn't John Robinson's 1965 book, Honest to God. It caused a bit of a stir back in the day, because it essentially challenged the view of God up there, us down here, and hell underneath. Robinson borrowed heavily from the ideas of Paul Tillich. God is, amongst other places, in the ground of our being, evident when we ponder, or even imagine, the big issues of life and death. Lennon encourages us to stop worrying about a man in the sky who will either punish us or reward us at the end of our lives, and start imagining what we can do today to realise his presence here and now. Verse 2. Imagine there's no countries. It doesn't need a huge amount of explaining this, but it's quite a big challenge, and it turns a lot of prevalent opinions on their heads. We in the UK are often fed newspaper headlines about illegal immigrants who come to our country and steal our jobs, blah de blah. How about a world where you and I are equal citizens who live on this ball of rock and can go wherever we please? Not to mention Lennon's statement that if we stop bickering about which bit of ground is mine and which bit is yours, the world would be a much more peaceful place. The chorus. Yoko more or less said, "A dream dreamed alone is a dream. A dream we dream together becomes reality." Verse 3. Implicit in the whole song is the idea of giving up our material attachments. In verse 1, we are encouraged to take a close look at our image of God. It's easy if you try. In verse 2, we are told that giving up country attachments isn't hard. But verse 3's call to give up our belongings is another matter. I wonder if you can. There's a whiff of "you can't, can you?" about this. That is why people go hungry and homeless in this world. And back to verse 1, if you ponder this issue and place the responsibility onto a man with a beard in the sky, the situation won't change. A Latin couplet explains this more succinctly. Ubi caritas et amor Deus ibi es. Wherever there is love and kindness is wherever God is. The responsibility is ours to imagine and go forth and do. The fact that this verse brings us so neatly back to the ideas in verse 1 is probably why the music is essentially 2 loops with a bridge passage in between them. It's a never-ending cycle that needs to be broken. I was quite good at writing stuff back in the day. This arrangement in this songbook is very poor. Right, I'll just quickly give you a bar of it. And that twiddle, doing that in the left hand, as they say, and then landing back on that C, will take a little bit of practice. It's actually quite difficult to do. Alright, I would much rather do the twiddle with my right hand, which is what I do. I play it an octave lower, and I put a few more sort of twiddles into the bass, so that I'm perhaps, playing octaves here. So on, right, and that kind of makes that. So that's the loop number 1 that I was talking about when I wrote that piece, okay. And then we have the "imagine all the people living for today," right. That bit is like a bridge part. We go back to verse 2, and then we come to the chorus, which is another loop, okay, which is just essentially chords F, G, C, E, F, G, C, E, F, G, C. And then you've got that little twiddle, which again they don't print. Like that, which then takes you up to verse 3. Alright? So that's Imagine then, okay? But as I say, there is this huge tension between this working class man and, or supposed working class man, this faux working class man, as you might describe him, and, the lifestyle that he is living here. For a songwriter with such a spectacularly unorthodox approach, Lennon emerged from a musical background which could scarcely have been more plebeian and inauspicious. The word plebeian, we don't really use it very much, but we do use it it's shortened word, pleb. Okay? For me, for example, somebody doing something plebby is common. It's kind of, it's an insult, really. So, for example, dunking your biscuits in your tea, or having milk and sugar in your Earl Grey tea, it's plebby. I joke about that, but somebody wiping their nose on their hand is plebby, alright? So for them to use this word plebeian here, they are taking it probably at its most literal sense, and I suppose, just trying to elevate this. So, plebeian and inauspicious. Something that's inauspicious is actually unlucky. So, his mother and his grandfather both played that slightly comic instrument, the banjo. This is somebody looking down their nose. It really is someone looking down their nose here. And he cut his musical teeth on the mouth organ, playing such wildly progressive music as Swedish Rhapsody and Moulin Rouge. You can imagine Melvin Bragg of the South Bank Show. The South Bank Show. What is the reason for this phenomenon? Him, the one that sort of spoke through his nose. You can imagine it's someone written by him. As I say, this is not my favourite album, and I'm going to say, You Jealous Guy, it's very pretty. Nicky Hopkins took, basically 3 chords, G, E minor, and D. Perhaps D7, you could perhaps count as another one, and going back to E minor. Right? And that, essentially, is Jealous Guy. Right? Because he's Nicky Hopkins, could do an awful lot of elaboration on that, right? So, although this is words and music by John Lennon wrote this song in 1968 in Rishikesh, when the Beatles were in India, and he wrote this song called Child of Nature. Now, Child of Nature, you will find on YouTube, you can hear the demo. I don't want to sound like a pleb, but I think it is such a dirge. It was awful as Child of Nature. And the fact, I'm going to, cite, perhaps, a Lennonism here, in that, here John Lennon was really relying very heavily on the musical style of Bob Dylan. Okay, now fair enough, it isn't Dylan, I want cheese and my underpants. This is, it's not him on a guitar, but it's sort of transposed there. And we just get this lyric, I was dreaming of the past and my heart was beating fast. I began to lose control, I began to lose control. So essentially, it's 3 lines with the 4th line repeated, yeah? And then the chorus. I didn't mean to hurt you. I'm sorry that I made you cry. I mean to hurt you. I'm just a jealous guy. Very, very folky lyrics. All right. Verse 2 and verse 3, we'll come back to verse 3, but verse 4, are pretty much in the same kind of template. And there ain't a lot of variety, folks. And it is just this chung, chung, chung. As I say, Nicky Hopkins has done a fantastic job of putting in piano twiddles and stuff. And actually, this arrangement of it is actually very good. For copyright reasons, I'm not going to play too much of stuff from this book, because otherwise I'll get demonetized. But, as I say, it's just a verse and a chorus, and a verse and a chorus, and a whistled verse that might as well be a harmonica, and a chorus, and a verse and a chorus. I don't, and then just a little codetta at the end. I'm just a jealous guy, watch out, look out babe, I'm just a jealous guy. I think that if not for you, on George Harrison's All Things Must Pass, which is, more in the Dylan tradition, George Harrison got it more than John did. John hasn't really done enough. He hasn't created a substantial enough verse, for example, for it to bear repeating 4 times. It's like, at midnight, shall we now join together and sing all 12 verses of the first Noel? By the time that you've got onto verse 3, you really are bored, and the song's too high to sing, and why on earth can't the organist play it a bit faster? It is a dirge, and it's just, as I say, quite sort of insubstantial. If not for you, for example, if you look at those words, if you look at how Bob Dylan can take the whole side 4 of Blonde on Blonde, and you not get bored of that one song, 13 odd minutes long. You know, even Lily Rosemary and the Jack of Hearts, for example. You know, they're great things. You know, and this is just not. It's just not. It's very nice indeed, but it's just a dirge. Sorry, and all. Tittenhurst Park, John and Yoko's Georgian house in Ascot, houses an 8-track recording studio where John recorded Imagine, and a telephone system that links every room, and we get a picture of it. Okay, I'll just quickly show you that picture. Okay, doesn't really look very inspiring here in that picture because it only takes up a third of the page, and then there's a picture of John underneath it taking up more of the space. But that house cost £150,000 for them at a time where most people's houses cost between £8,000 and £12,000. All right. The average person, you know, living in a button bed, 2 up, 2 down, whatever, you know, was paying probably 10 or 15 times less for their home than John Lennon was here. You can argue that, yes, he's earned that money over 10 years, and, you know, they're extraordinarily successful, and that's his talent and everything else like that. That is fine. That is fine, okay? But, as the critics would be saying, don't try and pretend you're a working class hero, because it doesn't really wash, okay? Have that stuff, fine, enjoy it, but imagine no possessions. Really, there's a huge disparity going on here. So in this book, the next song is Give Me Some Truth, which I like. I think, is it Jacob Dylan? Jacob Dylan, Bob Dylan's son, did a good version of Give Me Some Truth as well. It's great. It looks much harder on the sheet music to play than it really is. Alright? It's just arpeggios and it's lovely. So, yep, I like it. Okay? The piano is a birthday gift from John to Yoko and has a brass plate inscribed, "This morning, a white piano for Yoko." At right, John is seen by the circus poster in the billiard room. What have you got in your billiard room? Which gave him the inspiration for the Mr. Kite song on the Sgt. Pepper album. Crippled Inside, I think, is probably my favourite on the whole LP. It's just great. It's just great, and you know, I love all the sort of 10th chords here. So and it's great, and it's just, you know, really nice kind of, you know, C's just going to F. C. It's comical. It is comical. And if, you know, I made fun of the writer of this book a little bit, but John did play the banjo. He grew up playing the banjo. If you watch Mike Pichelli's tutorials on how to play the Beatles songs on guitar, you will quite often hear him say things like, you know, there's John Lennon's D chord in the banjo shape, kind of thing. And this is, you know, it is a piano imitating a banjo. It's also kind of in that kind of the Camptown Ladies sing this song, a-doo-dah, kind of style, you know, which those songs were kind of, you know, as I say, faux spirituals. They reversed the plight of the Negro slave so that, you know, it is the slave missing their master, you know, and we have such fun, you know, doing what our master wants us to do on the plantation and stuff. And yeah, this takes that whole thing and inverts it. You can go to church and sing a hymn, judge me by the colour of my skin. You can live a lie until you die, but one thing you can't hide is when you're crippled inside. So, you know, it's using, you know, the musical idiom, the kind of banjo-y, faux spiritual Camptown ladies kind of thing, and turning it on its head and singing the words as perhaps they should have been sung, you know, back in the day. Right? So yeah, I like Crippled Inside, and I am going to make no apologies for playing you this fantastic ending, because it really is great. One thing you can't hide is when you're crippled inside. One thing you can't hide is when you're crippled inside. One thing you can't hide is when you're crippled inside. Hi, thank you. Now we come to my favourite picture. This recording studio is something I've wanted all my life, says John. This is the working class hero for you. Sorry. This recording studio, set in the grounds of my £150,000 mansion, upon which we then went forth and spent double, i.e. £300,000, decorating and adding to and digging a lake up for which we didn't get planning permission for, is something that I've wanted all my life. It's something I've wanted all my life as well, you know. So yeah, bully on him for having it. It's lovely, right? There's some lovely footage again on YouTube of George Harrison recording "Oh My Love" with John Lennon, in which John Lennon turns around and snaps at a member of the film crew for trying to change a reel of film whilst they are going for a take in the studio, and he hears this whirring noise, says, "What was that?" and then, you know, gets in the mood with the cameraman, because they're making the film Imagine as well. I'm not really criticising John. I just think it's a bit funny, and it's just really the hype and baloney that's in this book. I will kind of try and offer my solution to this, which might kind of bring the two elements a bit further together. But yeah, it's so hard. It's all right. It's the blues, you know. It's okay. It's listenable. Doesn't go on for too long. I'm fine with it. I Don't Want to Be a Soldier is another, I think, dirge. Let's you know, even go back to like 1975, sorry, and the moment when disco dawned upon the white consciousness, the white heterosexual male consciousness, shall we put it that way? Because, you know, way back in the 60s, disco was for black women, gay men. It was, you know, a kind of underground movement that really, I suppose, catered for those kind of needs. And, you know, by the time that the Bee Gees had made their main course album in 75, 76, and John Travolta had done Saturday Night Fever, all it did was basically turn disco into something that is acceptable and safe, in quotes, for male, white, middle class, heterosexual to like. And that disco music basically just sort of use, sort of, you know, they could spend like, you know, maybe a couple of minutes just strumming the same chord as they can now, you know, just, you know, put on Get Lucky, or, you know, or just go back to Le Freak, C'est Chic or whatever, and it's just a riff going on. And this is what we have in I Don't Want to Be a Soldier as well. All right, I'm not going to be able to play it, okay? I might just try. just that sort of thing. So and basically, you know, it's got two chords in it, A7 and D7, right? And it gets up quite a groove and whatever, but it's not as groovy or as funky in the disco idiom. It's still firmly planted in the folk rock idiom. We just basically got here how many verses? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 of these verses. Lose yourself in it, I suppose, but it is Dylan again. It's Dylan again, but basically he can't even be bothered to write kind of 4 lines for a verse like he did in Jealous Guy. It's basically the same sentence. I don't wanna be a. I don't wanna. I don't wanna. Oh no. Oh no. Yeah, there's some puns here. My favourite one is I don't want to be a lawyer, mama, I don't want to lie. Just a pun on liar, lawyer. It's okay. It's okay. I like it, but you know, in terms of the piano arrangement, it really doesn't work on the piano at all. So just don't bother. I'm aware of the fact that this book is printing the songs out of order, but Oyoko's here. And again, this is another Dylan-esque. 5 verses this time. In the middle of the, I call your name, Oyoko, Oyoko, my love will turn you on. Right? And just changing the in the middle of thing, basically. And, you know, again, it is a kind of folky thing, but, you know, it's, again, quite insubstantial. I love the riff. I just love the fact. Very nice, very nice. Shame I can't play it very well, but yeah, it's all right. Very nice. I like it. I like it. It's a nice, bright, upbeat number to end the album on. We've made a lot of changes since we moved in, and we still haven't finished, say John and Yoko. As I say, they made £300,000 worth of changes. You know, back in the day, where spending £1 in 1970 was like spending nearly £10 today. So make of that what you will. Finally, they get to the nub of it. Not every house has a spotlight trained on the bath and a Salvador Dali original over the loo. Right, how? I think goes along with Crippled Inside as perhaps one of the more authentic statements on this LP, because John is talking about his childhood as he did on Plastic Ono Band. It's really very, very beautiful, very, very sparse. It includes, you know, all of the typical characteristics of Lennon that he could have, you know, perhaps woven into a song like Jealous Guy to liven that up a little bit, for example. You know, the fact that we have this sort of pulse going through it, right? 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. Okay, and then by the time that we get to the chorus, we're now in 3 time. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Now 5 time. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. How can I go forward when I don't know which way I'm facing? And, you know, this is perhaps a subject matter which transcends class. You don't have to worry about whether or not you're a working class hero. You could be Boris Johnson and still have an abusive father, which he did. It kind of transcends that, and I think, as I say, it's a much more authentic expression, and it's also, you know, just a little bit more substantial than, you know, some of those other songs, which I think just sort of go into overtly repetitiveness. Oh My Love is just beautiful. It's just beautiful, and it's got quite a nice piano arrangement as well. I haven't played it for a long time, but, you know, I think, you know, once, you know, you practice this for maybe kind of half an hour a day, and you will soon get into being able to sing this and play it at the same time. But I just love it. I love the introduction. It's really nice. So, you know, so far, what have we got? At least 4 good tracks. Imagine, Crippled Inside, How, Oh My Love. You know, again, you know, very, very simple verse and lyric form, but it's not a dirge. And they're just beautiful chords, Okay, How Do You Sleep? Very well documented, as, you know, this is John insulting his best friend Paul. You know, he went on telly in 1972 and actually said, you know, if I can't insult my best mate, then who can? Kind of thing. You know, he described Paul as his best friend. He also said that there was this myth going round that they were at each other's throats, when in fact, you know, he said, you know, he'd been out to dinner with Paul the week before he was on the show, kind of thing. So yeah, you know, you could perhaps make a little bit much, but, you know, across the Atlantic, Paul and John were singing songs to one another. And, you know, this one was, you know, John's argument with Paul at that time, right? Ringo walked in on it and basically got very upset. He walked in on the recording session, got very upset and said, you know, come on, John, that's enough now, you know, kind of thing. I'd be very interested to hear what they edited out of this, you know. It's got some nice sort of fourth notes in here. And John, interestingly, actually rewrote this song for the Walls and Bridges album. But there you can tell that this time the person he's insulting is not Paul, it's himself. It's himself, because he was in a right mess at that time. And, you know, really and truthfully, you know, he wanted a way out of it and a way back to Yoko by the time that he was, you know, out on his ear, right? And that is basically that album. I need to think about how we can draw together these disparate elements, and I'm going to go way back to the 1920s and 1930s and to a theologian. You know, John Lennon started his album off, the first words that came out of his mouth were theology. Imagine there's no heaven, right? So I'm going to go to a lady called Simone Weil. Now, Simone Weil, she was a theologian. She was born as a non-practicing Jew into the Jewish faith, but non-practicing. She went to live in France and never actually converted to the Catholic faith, but saw an awful lot in it and wrote an awful lot about it. But she was also very heavily involved with the French left-wing communist movement. You know, this, you know, we're not talking Stalin here, but, you know, we are talking about, you know, Marxism and, you know, I suppose, you know, what you might call now sort of luxury automated communism. You know, imagine that, you know, perhaps she's the Ash Sarkar of the day kind of thing. And she went for a job because, you know, she didn't need to. She was from a very well-to-do family. She had all the money she required. You know, Dad, you know, the banker Dad would put her up all the time, and you know, she had no real reason to do it, except that what she wanted to do was try and, you know, not just write lofty, hard to understand books on theology to the working class, you know, or hard to understand books on politics, or both. To the working class. She wanted to find out what it was actually like, and so she went and got herself a job in the Renault factory, and the experience nearly gave her a nervous breakdown, right? Because I suppose the noise, the din, the fact that, you know, the means of production, you know, if you can own the means of production, you've actually got a chance to compete with people on their level. But if you are a minion, if you are just in that factory, just making the little nut that goes inside the gearbox, or the clutch pedal, or whatever it is that you happen to be making, you have not necessarily got the knowledge to put a car together. And the workforces were very much organised into that kind of way, so that, you know, no one would ever see more than two bits of the car going together, and so you had no way of the workforce suddenly saying, right, I know how a car works now. I could quite easily go and put one together and, you know, build a factory down the road from Renault and call it whatever I want to call it, and make my own cars and compete. Right? Naomi Klein noticed exactly the same thing with her in her book in the late 90s. She wrote a book called No Logo. And she was in South America. She was talking to some people, and she said, "Well, what do you do?" And I said, "Well, we work in a computer factory. We make CD-ROM drives." And she said, "Well, that's, you know, presumably a very technical thing to do, you know, because, you know, 90s, the internet, CD-ROMs, you know, it all taken off and everything. You know, the birth of the modern computer industry." And no. Because we haven't got a clue how to do the rest of it. We only make CD-ROM drives. You know, how it fits together into a computer, we don't know, right? And you can imagine that exactly the same thing is going on in these huge Chinese factories where they manufacture, you know, Samsung Galaxies and Apple iPhones and whatever. You know, we know how to put the camera in. You know, or, you know, we can do this little bit of the motherboard, this little bit of circuitry here, all right? And then it goes along and along and along. It's a way of keeping the minions employed, which they want to do, but they don't own the means of production. In the same way that when John Lennon was recording with the Beatles, it was unheard of, I think, at the time, for people to kind of step outside the confines of the record company. So for John Lennon to have his own studio at the time, I've been making fun of it. I'm making fun of the kind of the tone in which this editorial is written in this book, all right? I can also see this massive disparity, but also what he's done and what has actually made him a working class hero here is taken hold of at least some of the means of production. He still relied on EMI and their massive distribution machine to get that record out to the buying public. But the fact that he didn't have EMI people over his shoulder. I mean, the closest that the Beatles had got to this themselves was going to Trident to record Hey Jude. Possibly because Abbey Road was booked on the day that they wanted to record Hey Jude. Right? So yeah, John was a working class hero. He was a working class hero. Because here, probably for one of the first recorded times in history, apart from, you know, very small time people like Joe Meek, for example, who invented the compressor. But, you know, that was the compressor. That's one tiny cog in the studio. You know, he still needed to go into a studio to do his experiments with the compressor and write, what was it, something like Tornado or something like that, some piece that he wrote. But John is saying, look, you know, we can do it ourselves. We can do it ourselves, and taking a great big handful of the means of production and saying, look, you know, I'm free to choose whatever producer I want. The fact that I'm going to choose a total madman called Phil Spector, who will hardly turn up, by the way, is my business, and I can do that, and I don't need a record company telling me who I can and can't choose. I don't need a record company or, you know, or a studio engineer boss kind of thing telling me that I'm not allowed to push the levels up into the distortion zone, or to have the treble as much treble as I want, or as much bass as I want. I'll do it myself kind of thing, thank you very much, you know. And that was a big kind of step for someone that, you know, perhaps he wasn't working class, you know, certainly lower middle class, maybe something like that, you know. That's a huge step for him, you know, and a huge step for, you know, everybody. That studio, incidentally, in fact the whole house, after the Lennons moved to America in 72, they only had it for a year, blooming heck, you know, they sold it to Ringo. Ringo kept those studios open, I think, till about 1988, and lots of people actually recorded albums there, you know. So, you know, it did get used, and, you know, it was a blow in the right direction, taking back the means of control. You know, we don't only know how to strum a guitar or write a song, we can make the whole darn thing ourselves. And with that, I thank you very much. Please remember to like, subscribe, share if you dare, and I'll see you again in the next video. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.